Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Hello.
Hi there.
So today we're diving into a really fascinating, pretty pivotal time.
Yeah. Which part?
The first big encounters between Japan and Europeans,
Yeah.
right smack in the middle of the Sengoku period.
Ah, right. When Japan was internally, well, let's say busy.
Busy is one word for it. Warlords everywhere. But at the same time, you've got Europeans sailing all over the globe.
Exactly. Looking for new ways to get to Asia because the usual land routes were complicated.
Right. And the big players initially were Portugal and Spain, the sort of pioneers of this whole age of exploration.
Absolutely. Spain going west, finding the Americas, setting up in the Philippines.
And Portugal heading east, around Africa, building up posts in India, Malacca, getting closer.
And it's worth remembering those Portuguese routes eastward. That's how later Japanese missions like the Tensho Embassy actually got to Europe.
Yeah, starting from Nagasaki. And we also see figures like Tanaka Shosiya, Hazakura Tsunaga later on. But the very, very first direct contact, that's 1543, isn't it?
That's the key date. 1543, a Chinese ship, kind of blown off course, lands on Tanegashima.
Tanegashima down in Kyushu.
And on board, some Portuguese individuals. That's it, the first documented face-to-face meeting.
Wow. So, okay, they land unexpectedly. What happens next? Is it just a one-off?
Not at all. The Portuguese, they saw potential pretty quickly, profit potential.
Trade.
Exactly. It wasn't long before their ships were showing up, like, annually, hitting different ports in Kyushu.
Because it was worth their while.
Definitely. And the Spanish saw this too, eventually setting up their own base in Hirado for trade.
So it becomes a regular thing centered in Kyushu.
Yeah, the main spots early on were Hirado, Nagasaki, and also Funai in Bungo province.
Which is Oita City now.
Correct. Those became the key hubs for this interaction.
And the Japanese had a name for these newcomers, right?
They did. They called them Nanban.
Nanban.
Literally means southern barbarians. So the trade itself got called the Nanban trade.
Southern barbarians. Gives you a sense of maybe cultural distance or just geography.
Probably a bit of both. It definitely highlights they were seen as distinctly foreign.
So this Nanban trade, what was actually changing hands? What were the goods?
Well, the Europeans brought things Japan really wanted or found very useful. Firearms, obviously.
We'll definitely come back to those.
Oh, yeah. Also gunpowder, certain silk fabrics, things like that.
And from Japan. Going out.
Primarily silver. Japan had a lot of silver, plus their swords, which were, legendary quality, and marine products, too.
Okay, let's zero in on those firearms. You said that first landing on Tanegashima.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a quick hello.
No, far from it. The local lord there, Angashima Tokitaka, he was apparently just captivated by these guns the Portuguese had.
Just fascinated.
Totally. So much that he bought a couple, but crucially, he didn't just buy them. He told his men, figure out how these work, make them.
Right. Reverse engineer them.
Yeah.
Learn to manufacture them.
Exactly. And that right there is the start of gun making in Japan. It wasn't just about getting the tech, it was about owning the production.
That's a huge step. So how did it spread? Did other daimyo catch on quickly?
Oh, incredibly quickly. Once other lords saw how effective these guns were in battle, well, everyone wanted them.
You can imagine. It must have changed warfare completely.
It really did. The old ways, focusing heavily on cavalry charges, that started to shift. More emphasis on infantry, armed with these new guns.
So tactics changed. Army organization.
The whole structure of a daimyo's fighting force began to adapt. It became less about individual samurai prowess and more about coordinated volleys, firepower.
What kind of guns were they exactly, these first ones?
They were matchlocks, arquebuses you'd call them.
Matchlogs. So lighting a fuse.
Yeah, a slow-burning cord, the match, ignites the powder. They had limits, of course, pretty useless in the rain.
All right, damp powder.
And slow to reload, maybe 4 shots a minute if you were good.
4 shots a minute. Seems slow now, but back then.
Against swords and arrows, it was revolutionary. A game changer.
But how did Japan go from, a couple of guns on an island to making them everywhere so fast? That seems like a massive leap.
Well, here's the key. Japan already had incredibly skilled metalworkers. Their swordsmiths were masters.
Ah, right. Centuries of practice forging steel.
Exactly. So adapting those skills, the forging, the metallurgy to make gun barrels wasn't as big a leap as you might think. Places like Sakai.
Near Osaka.
Yes, Sakai in Izumi, also Nagoro in Ki, Kunitomo in Omi.
Yeah.
These became centers for gun production. They had the craftsmen.
And the materials.
Yeah.
Like for bullets.
Japan had domestic sources of lead, which was perfect. So they had the skill, they had the materials, they just needed the initial design.
So they leveraged what they already excelled at. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Okay, so firearms are transforming warfare, but that wasn't the only major import, was it?
Not at all. The other huge introduction was Christianity.
Right, coming alongside the traders.
Pretty much. You have to remember the context in Europe, the Counter-Reformation,
The Catholic Church pushing back against Protestantism.
and looking to expand its influence globally. Asia was a big focus. Spreading the faith was a major goal, alongside trade for powers like Portugal and Spain.
And the first major figure we associate with this in Japan is Francis Xavier.
Yes, Francis Xavier,
Yeah.
one of the founders of the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. He lands in Kagoshima, down south again.
In 1549, so just 6 years after the first Portuguese arrived on Tanegashima.
Exactly. Things move fast. Xavier spent about 2 years traveling around, learning, observing, sort of testing the waters.
Laying the groundwork.
Precisely, preparing for more missionaries to follow.
And did they follow? How did Christianity actually spread?
Oh, they did. More missionaries came, and they actively started trying to convert people. Now, obviously, there were clashes, new religious ideas bumping up against centuries of Shinto and Buddhist tradition.
You'd expect that.
But the missionaries were often involved in social work, too, helping the poor, providing some medical assistance.
Things that would win people over.
It certainly helped. Christianity started gaining followers, samurai, merchants, farmers, across different social levels.
And they started building infrastructure for the faith.
Yes, churches started appearing, often called nanbanji.
Ah, the Southern Barbarian Temples, that name again.
Right. And they also set up schools, colleges, or collegios for training Japanese clergy and workers in seminarios for more advanced theological study.
So really embedding it, where did it take root most strongly?
Mostly in western Japan, Kyushu, parts of western Honshu. And interestingly, a lot of the early converts, maybe the majority, came from poorer backgrounds. The numbers grew quite significantly into the hundreds of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. That's substantial. Was it only the common folk? What are the daimyo, the lords?
Some daimyo got involved too. Sometimes their motives were, well, maybe mixed.
Like wanting trade benefits.
That was definitely a factor for some. Access to those European goods, especially the guns we talked about, was a powerful lure. Supporting the missionaries could smooth the path for trade.
So some converted, or at least supported Christianity, for strategic reasons.
It seems likely in some cases. But we do get the emergence of genuine Kurishitan daimyo Christian lords who were baptized.
Any famous examples?
Yeah, the big three usually mentioned are Otomo Soren of Bungo, Arima Harunobu, and Omura Sumitada.
And these Christian daimyo did something pretty extraordinary, didn't they? Sending an embassy.
The Tensho Embassy, yes, in 1582. These three lords, guided by a prominent Jesuit named Velinano,
Right.
they selected 4 young Japanese boys, teenagers really, Mansu Ito, Miguel Chijiwa, Julian Akara, and Martino Hara,
And sent them where?
all the way to Europe to meet the Pope in Rome, an absolutely epic journey back then.
Wow. Young Japanese boys meeting the Pope in the 1580s. That really shows how interconnected things were starting to get.
It really does. It's a remarkable story.
Before we wrap up this phase, what about those first impressions? You mentioned Xavier traveling around. What did he think of the Japanese people he met?
It's quite interesting. His early letters show, well, a lot of admiration, actually.
Really? Like what?
He commented on their strong sense of honor, how poverty wasn't seen as shameful, how status seemed based more on, like, merit or honor than just wealth.
Different from Europe, perhaps.
Possibly what struck him. He also noted they disliked insults, weren't much into gambling, and that theft was rare. He found them literate, kind, sociable, and very curious intellectually.
High praise, actually.
It really is a very positive initial take considering the vast cultural differences.
So looking back at this whole first wave of contact, what are the absolute key takeaways, the big changes set in motion?
Well, 2 massive things stand out. First, firearms. Their introduction and rapid adoption just fundamentally changed Japanese warfare. Tactics, army structures, everything.
The instruction in warfare, you could say.
Exactly. And second, Christianity, a completely new belief system, arriving, spreading, gaining hundreds of thousands of followers, influencing society, even daimyo politics.
And both came through that Nanban trade connection.
Right. The trade was the vehicle for goods, guns, but also ideas, religion, culture. It was the start of Japan's sustained direct interaction with the West.
A real turning point in Japanese history. It opened a door that, in many ways, never fully closed again.
Precisely. These first encounters, driven by God, gold, and glory, you might say, they laid down the foundations for a much more complex relationship later on.
So maybe something for you to think about. How did these initial seeds, the guns changing war, Christianity offering a new path, the lure of trade, how do they shape what came next for Japan? What echoes of this Nanban era might still be felt even subtly in Japan today?
Definitely something to ponder.
Join us next time for another deep dive into Japanese history.